All right, so you want to become a bird watcher. I've got 10 tips to make this super easy for you. Let's dive in. All right, so tip number 1 on my list is that you don't need expensive gear to start birding. In fact, you don't need any gear at all. In reality, all you really need to start birding is your ears or your eyes. Obviously, a pair of binoculars helps, but you don't need to break the bank in getting an expensive pair of binoculars. Anything around $80 should do the trick, especially if you're just starting out. And again, like I mentioned before, you don't really need to buy any gear at all. You don't even need to buy any field guides. If you have a phone or if you have access to the internet, you can check out eBird online. They have a lot of resources to tell you all about birds. And Merlin ID is a free app by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. This app is like a field guide in your pocket. You can narrow things down by city or state or wherever you are, and it'll show you what birds are probable in your area. So in reality, you don't even need to invest in a field guide if you don't have the funds to do so. Tip number 2 that I have for you is to start small and then expand. There are 10,000 plus bird species in the world. Even after years and years of experience, most people do not know all of them. There's over 750 bird species in the United States alone, making it pretty daunting to try to go through and memorize every single bird out there. It's much easier to start small, like in your backyard or at a local park, and learn those birds first. Once you have those birds' calls and behaviors, and you know how to identify the birds around you, you can expand out and add birds to your arsenal the further out you go. Number 3 on my list is to join a birding community. There's lots of communities out there that are free to join. There's communities on Facebook. You just search up your state name or your county name even, and you can find Facebook birding groups that are great resources for your learning. You can go join in-person groups, like there's Audubon societies that lead bird walks. There's nature centers locally that might be leading bird walks as well. It's very important to identify what these are early on and make connections with people. There's Discord communities that include state discords. I know if you just search up like birding Discord for, whatever state you're in or whatever province you're in, you might be able to find a local Discord community. All of this stuff is really, really great for learning the birds around you and for meeting people who have similar interests as you. In fact, the fastest way to learn the local birds around you is to join a community and learn from someone who's already been doing it for quite some time. They can point out the ID field marks, they can point out the behaviors that you want to look for, and it's really the quickest way that you can learn how to be a birder. If you'd like a Discord community or a Facebook community, I have one for each. Down in the description below, they're my own personal communities. There's birders from all over the world in these communities, so check out the links below if you're interested. Tip number 4, the birds that you hear are just as important as the birds that you can see. A lot of times we focus on what birds we can see around us, but we often hear birds long before we see them, and in many cases, we never actually see the bird, but we might hear it only. In reality, the birds that you hear are obviously there, and they should go on any birding list that you have. Also, if you learn bird calls, which is a very important skill to have, start with the ones again that are common to your area, learn those calls, and then expand out to broader areas. If you can learn these calls, then you can listen for the bird you're looking for and be able to go find it much easier than just trying to figure out where they are as they fly from tree to tree. Birding by ear is just as valuable as birding with your eyes, in many cases more valuable, so don't ignore it. Tip number 5 is to put feeders in your yard. If you put feeders in your yard, you can attract different species of birds. This will help you learn the local birds around you much quicker than going out to places, especially if you bird your yard on a continuous basis. A lot of people like to bird their yards every morning before they go to work. This is a great way to learn the birds around you as well. Now, I recognize that not all people have access to yards. I live in a 2-story apartment, so I don't really have a place to hang up a bird feeder. In this instance, go to your local parks or maybe a nearby cemetery, a place that has a lot of tree cover nearby, and learn the birds there. This is called a patch, somewhere that's close to you, somewhere that you know the birds and you can be an expert in birds in just that one little area. So learn the birds in your yard and maybe bring the birds in by using bird feeders. Number 6 is super important. It is to record your sightings. Now, there's a myriad of different ways that you can do this. My personal favorite is to download the eBird app, or if you don't have a phone, you can access eBird online. This is a free resource where you can log your entire life list or the birds that you've seen during your lifetime. I like to log birds every time I go out birding, and eBird makes this really, really easy. It also contributes to community science, and they actually use this bird sighting data for their research projects, so you're contributing to the greater good as well. You can also use apps or websites like iNaturalist. This also allows you to record your data and contributes to science as well, although iNaturalist asks for a photo of the bird. So eBird is a lot more catered to birders. iNaturalist is more catered to nature in general, especially plants and insects. And then lastly, if you're not really into the whole technology thing, you can just record your sightings on a notepad and a piece of paper. This is really, really awesome for, creating your own milestones and seeing, oh, I got this new bird today, and going back through your notes to see where you've seen certain species or where you haven't seen them. So definitely record your sightings. This will help you practice as a birder and become a better birder overall. Tip number 7 is to never stop learning about birds. Like I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of free resources available online. Merlin ID app is one of those resources. They'll have little blurbs about the birds and their ranges and just a whole bunch of different tidbits of information that's completely free. eBird.org as well online will have a whole bunch of information for you to cycle through as well. Both are done by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. If you have a small budget, you can also purchase a field guide. Now you can get a really good field guide for under $20. Sibley field guides are my favorite. They're illustrated, and those illustrations really help you to learn the birds and their different plumages and stuff like that. But there's also National Geographic field guides, Peterson field guides. There's a whole bunch out there, so just go check out your local bookstore and see if you can pick up a field guide for under $20 or so. Obviously, channels like this will teach you about birds, and so just going through YouTube and finding a BirdTube creator is a great way to learn about birds for free as well. And then lastly, there's a whole bunch of different podcasts out there that teach you about birds. Some of my favorites are the Bird Joy podcast. They just talk about bird joy in general, and you learn a whole bunch of really cool information that you wouldn't learn anywhere else. The American Birding Association has a really good podcast as well. And then I just recently discovered the Science of Birds. That's an amazing podcast to learn about bird behavior and just really deep dive into the literature if you want a lot more details. Number 8, it's okay to be wrong. A lot of people actually hold themselves back from birding because they don't ever want to be wrong. Some of the best birders out there are wrong. I get IDs wrong all the time. I'm nowhere near the top or anything, but it's just a part of birding. It's okay to make mistakes. Now, obviously, you want to put as much effort as you possibly can into identifying the bird yourself. But then if you still can't figure it out, go ahead and reach out to a friend or a birding community. There's the What's This Bird Facebook group that's really, really good at answering questions, and they will give you some answers as to what your bird is. They almost always identify the bird, and they'll also sometimes give you pointers on things. I also don't mind answering questions, so you can shoot me a DM on Instagram at Bright-Eyed Birding, and I'd be happy to answer any bird ID or bird behavior questions that you have. Tip number 9. Now this one is very important, probably the most important one on this list, and that is make sure you go birding around sunrise. It's not a bad thing to bird, throughout the day, in the afternoon or in the evening. Birds are there at all times of the day, but by far the best time for birding is right around sunrise and for that first couple hours of daylight. It's very important to get up and get out early. That's when you'll see a ton of different birds. I've taken a lot of friends out birding for their first times in the middle of the afternoon. It hasn't always been the best experience, but if you go out in the morning, you're much more likely to find much more diversity of birds and a lot more of them as well. They spend all night long waiting until morning, and then they finally wake up and go, boom, I'm ready to eat. That's the best time to go find your birds, especially during the warmer months of the year. My last tip for you is to enjoy nature as a whole. Obviously, as a birder, you want to go out and find a whole bunch of different birds. But sometimes the birds just aren't around, or they're not showing up. It's not the right conditions. Maybe it's not the right habitat. So if that's the case, pay attention to what else is around you. I love to pay attention to the plants. I love to pay attention to the mammals that might be around, deer, elk, raccoons, all of that type of stuff. Squirrels, they seem to always be where birds are. Pay attention to the nature around you. Also, a really fun thing to do is just look at the landscape as a whole around you. Look at the beautiful views that you might be missing if you're just focused and frustrated that there aren't birds around. Remember, iNaturalist is a great app to use for some of these other living organisms, and I love to identify the flowers that are around me and some of the native plant species that are in the area. So birding is a great gateway to becoming an amazing naturalist in general, and I highly encourage you to open your eyes to beyond the birds and pay attention to all the living things around you and finding a better appreciation in nature as a whole. I hope these 10 tips were helpful to you, especially if you want to start out being a bird watcher or a birder. Let me know in the comments below what's a tip that I may have missed that you think is very important to starting your journey as a birder or a bird watcher. Remember that over on my other channel, Bright Eyed Birding, I go on nature adventures 2 times a week. So make sure you check out that channel if you're interested. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright Eyed Birding Learn.